Okay, well, it is time to give you a special lesson prep. And you can see today I am sitting above the town square in Merida, Mexico, one of my favorite places in all of the world. Right behind me here, that is the oldest church built in North America. And it's Catholic Church, of course, where that flag is up here. That is the governor's palace, and just a wonderful, beautiful place. And I thought to celebrate this lesson and what it will represent for us, I thought I should be in a very happy place. Now, this lesson that I am using here and going over lesson prep for you is for the first Sunday that we will be back in Sunday school. Now, listen very carefully. I have no idea when that will be. Pastor has no idea when that will be. You know, even if the government here in a few weeks begins to open up things, we don't know what that will look like for us as a church. Will we? What I'm doing here is just giving you the lesson so that whenever we do this, whenever we have a 9 o'clock Sunday school hour again, this will be the first lesson that we teach. So if you're doing the virtual lessons, this is not for that, okay? But what I wanted to do is a lot of you are not doing the virtual lessons, and that's fine. So these, you can go ahead and, I mean, man, you have all the time in the world to prepare for this lesson. This ought to be a really good kicking lesson because uh, who knows how long we will have to get ready for it. So you can download the lesson right below here. You can download it as always in Word if you want to edit it and put your own personal spin on it, or you can download it in PDF and just print it out if you just want to see what I've got on it. This is a very simple lesson. And I think the challenge for us in teaching this lesson will be to keep it simple, right? That it's profound, and we want to keep it that way, okay? So if you look at the introduction, let me just walk you through it. It says COVID-19 was certainly a disruption, right? It was a disruption. Our lives were rescheduled, they were restricted. We were taught a very valuable lesson that we're not nearly as in control as we think we are. It was also devastating. While many of us, our lives were not directly impacted, thousands of people died. Many people were furloughed or lost their jobs. Thousands of people watched their retirement plans go down the drain. It had a devastating effect in many, many areas. And then, of course, it was different. Most of us have never lived through a time like this before, and it was different. But the point I want to make is that while all of those are true, while it was a disruption, it was devastating, it was different, it also, if we're thinking biblically, was an unbelievable opportunity. It was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to sort of get back to the basics and to get back to the things that we believe to be true, things that are defined by God as truth and reality. And here's the big idea. It's across the top of your lesson. While many things have changed, many things remain the same. And what I want us to look at in this lesson are three things, three key lessons that we should have all been reminded of with COVID, but that we, if we weren't, we'll bring them up this Sunday and allow them to get it. So the text is James chapter 4, verses 13 to 17. I got to admit, when all of this started, this was the passage that sort of came to me often. The very second week of this thing, Michelle and I were supposed to go to Washington, D.C. for a trip with our daughter. And of course, we had to cancel that and put that on hold. And I kept going back to these passages in James where he talks about how you make the plans, and you ought to be thinking, and you ought to be saying, if the Lord wills, if the Lord wills. And so here's the three simple facts that we want to keep simple. The first one is life is fragile. Life is fragile. And I gave you that illustration right there in letter B. Did you have anything you had planned before COVID-19 came up that you had to cancel? Might have been a vacation. For a lot of people who have kids, it was spring break trips. a business conference you were going to attend that got canceled, a family gathering on Easter Sunday. And you can just allow the class to sort of share some of those ideas and then make this point. Look at those little bullet points underneath the illustration. None of these events were canceled because they were bad ideas. None of these events were canceled because they were sinful and we shouldn't have been doing it. None of these were canceled because there was a lack of interest. You know, it's not like Michelle and I just all of a sudden say, we don't want to go to DC anymore. These events were canceled because something we did not see coming arrived and interrupted our plans. And look down there at letter F. COVID-19 has proven we're not as in control as we think we are. We can make plans and we should. We can save and we should. And all of those things. But I think this event has made us recognize, or at least look in the mirror and understand that life is fragile. Our plans are only as good as the piece of paper they're typed on. You know what I'm saying? And they can all change just like that. Point number one, life is fragile. Number two, death is sure. Death is sure. You know, a lot of people, and rightly so, were very concerned about what were the symptoms of COVID. You know, I went through that a little bit myself. You know, I have bad seasonal allergies. In the very first week we went through this, I developed an upper respiratory infection. And, you know, that's pretty common. I know what that is. That's not a problem. But about 3 or 4 days into it, I started running a low-grade fever. So I was waking up in the middle of the night. I was taking my temperature. I was taking my temperature throughout the day. I would wake up in the middle of the night sweating, or I would just be freezing. I can remember driving home one day from work with the heater on full blast, you know, and it was 80 degrees outside. And what was freaking me out was they said, hey, the symptoms of COVID are like an upper respiratory infection, but you also run a low-grade fever. And, you know, so I was calling my daughter who's a nurse and, you know, should I get tested? She said, yeah, you probably just ought to call. So I did the MUSC teledoc thing, and they correctly diagnosed me with just an upper respiratory infection. But a lot of people were concerned, and rightfully so. I know people that didn't leave their house for a month, and we can go, wow, that was crazy. Not really. If you're at risk, that's the wise and smart thing to do. But what was interesting to that, and here was the point, letter D, top of the second page on your lesson, James' point in verse 14 is that our overall chance of dying before COVID-19 was 100%. And when COVID-19 is over and we're allowed to go back to whatever the new normal is, it's still going to be 100%. What COVID-19 made us do is sort of say, you know, death is real. We live our lives almost in denial that death is a real thing. That's why funerals are so powerful for evangelism opportunities, because it's one of the very few times in our culture where people have to stop for 30 minutes and deal with the reality that death is real. And whether you die from COVID-19 or not, that's not the question. You're going to die. Outside of the rapture, we're going to die. So life is fragile. Death is sure. And then point number 3 is really the application. In light of those two facts, what are we to do? Well, we're to redeem the time. We're to make the most of those times. James offered the suggestion in verse 15. We have to make plans and we keep our calendars, but we ought to hold on to those plans loosely. Where James says we ought to say, if the Lord wills, right? We ought to hold on to those things loosely. We ought to enter into those plans with the understanding that this is what we intend to do. This might even be what we hope to do, but we also have the realization that life is real. Life is fragile. Death is sure. We may not make it. We may not make it to these plans. Look at the little bullet points under point 3B. How much of our routine stress in life is a result of our plans not going like we wish they had planned? You see, we freak out a lot. We stress out a lot when things don't go like we thought they ought to go. Well, if we remember that life is fragile, then we understand that plans change. And that plans most often change. They change more than they stay the same, to be honest with you. When we live with the reality, point number 2 there, that despite my best efforts, plans can and will change. It helps me deal better and more biblically with the unplanned events of life. And then I take you over to Ephesians 5, verses 15 through 17. And Paul gives his twist on this principle of Scripture. Verse 15, he says, you got to walk wisely. Verse 16, he says, redeem the time, meaning make the most of the time that you have. Now, I think it's important to point out here that when we say redeem the time and make the most of the time, what we're not saying is that you cram everything you can into the time you have. People live like they're at Disney World and they have to hit every ride before the park closes, or it's just not going to be a successful day. And that's not what Paul is talking about. He's not saying that we're supposed to live just from wall to wall, from bed back to bed at night at 100 miles an hour, right? In fact, if you go read the Gospels and look through the lenses at the pace of life that Jesus led. You never see Jesus in a hurry. You never see him rushing to get anywhere. He goes with purpose, right? But he's not rushing to do it. And the classic case of that is when they sent for him that Lazarus was sick and he delayed a couple of days, right? He was never in a hurry. So redeeming the time doesn't mean that we collapse into the bed every night. But what it does mean is that we make the most of the opportunities we have. And then the time that we have, we focus our attention on those things that matter most in light of eternity, in light of what Scripture dictates we ought to be focused on. So look at letter D under point 3. Most people had extra time during COVID-19. Think about your life. Did you redeem the time, or did you binge watch Netflix? Did you spend more time with the Lord in prayer and his word, or did you spend more time on social media? Did you spend more meaningful time with your family, or more time watching President Trump's press briefings? None of those things are bad in and of themselves, but we're not necessarily redeeming the time if we're doing some of those things and neglecting what God has already asked us to do. So we make the most of the time. So look at the application. You have a lot of application through this. Actually, that whole last point is application. Here's just a couple closing thoughts if you have time for discussion on that day. What were some good things that came out of COVID-19 for you and your family that you want to do now? I know a lot of my young married families really got to have a lot of time where if they had young children that are so involved in activities, they got to stay home. They got to eat dinner together. What are some of those things that you experience that you want to hold on to, that you don't want to go back to normal? You don't want to find yourself on that gerbil wheel, that hamster wheel in their little cage there where you're just spinning and actually going nowhere. So talk about some of those things. Talk about some specifics. Challenge them to be specific. For a lot of people, they had more time to spend in Bible study and prayer. Well, is that something you want to cut back on now that life is back to normal? Or can you build your new life around that? That's when we're talking back in the intro. This is an opportunity to start again and do some things differently based on the experience that we've just had. And then I love this last bullet point. You might even use this as a close. If you knew you only had 1 month to live, how would you spend your time? That gives you a lot of clarity. If you could say if you only had a week to live, or if you only had a day to live, how would you spend your time? That all of a sudden gives you crystal clear clarity on the behaviors that are important. Here's the point. You may only have a month to live. You may only have a week to live. You may only have a day to live. You may only have an hour to live. So see, we don't know, we know that death is sure, but we don't know when it's going to occur. So the application for us to redeem the time, live like you're dying. Make the most out of the opportunities that you have. So I think it's going to be a good lesson. Here's the deal. Again, we don't know what Sunday we'll teach this. We will teach this the first Sunday we're back. So you can go ahead and begin preparing it and putting it together. And you have plenty of time. And once we get that date in mind and we know what we're allowed to do, then we will broadcast that to you. But I just wanted to get this out in your hands early enough so that you can begin working on it and going over it. Okay? If you have any questions or any concerns, feel free to reach out to me. God bless you. Thank you so much for paying attention. And I will see you soon.